What if the moon isn't what we think it is? For decades, one strange phrase has fueled one of the wildest lunar theories. The moon rang like a bell. I mean, it sounds entirely like science fiction, doesn't it? But the truth is, this wasn't some internet rumor. It actually started with a very real observation. Welcome to this Explainer investigation. Tonight, we're opening up the Enigma Files to uncover the truth. Are we looking at a giant hollow sphere orbiting our planet? Or is there a much simpler yet equally fascinating scientific explanation? Let's crack open File 021, the hollow moon. Part 1, the moon that rang. To really understand this anomaly, we have to look back at the groundbreaking Apollo missions. You see, when astronauts placed scientific instruments on the lunar surface, and when pieces of spacecraft were later deliberately crashed into the moon to test them, the results were absolutely baffling. The vibrations didn't just thud and stop. They continued for a surprisingly, almost impossibly long time compared to how things work here on Earth. We are talking about reverberations lasting for hours, not just minutes. If the moon is just solid rock, why did it seem to just keep vibrating?
Part 2, the experiment. Okay, let's dive into this and see how astronauts gathered this baffling data in the first place. The setup back in the late 60s and early 70s was actually brilliantly straightforward. First, Apollo astronauts left highly sensitive seismometers right there on the dusty lunar surface. Next, they just waited, letting these instruments detect natural vibrations from things like deep moonquakes and meteorite impacts over the months and years. Finally, they escalated things. They measured deliberate impacts caused by spent spacecraft modules crashing into the surface. They basically struck the moon with a hammer to see exactly how it would react. And this is exactly where that famous quote comes from. NASA scientists themselves use this exact phrase, ringing like a bell, to describe the highly unusual behavior of the seismic waves they were recording. The vibrations from these impacts just kept going and going. But, as we'll find out, the way we interpret that quote makes all the difference in the world. Part 3, the hollow moon. This brings us to the prime suspect in our investigation, a theory born entirely from taking that NASA description just a little too literally. The hollow moon theory is the claim that the moon might contain enormous empty spaces inside, or, in the most extreme versions, that it's an entirely hollow shell. Proponents of this theory argue that a hollow interior perfectly explains those long-lasting vibrations. After all, if you strike a hollow metal bell in a clock tower, the reverberations ring out for a long time, right? The logic seems really sound on the surface, which is exactly why it caught fire in the public imagination. But here is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. The very same seismic data that people use to support the hollow moon theory actually provides the strongest evidence against it. Scientists didn't just measure how long the vibrations lasted, they measured exactly how the waves traveled through the interior. And that rich data allowed them to model a layered solid lunar interior, not an empty shell. So the exact evidence used to prop up the theory actually contradicts it entirely. Part 4, artificial origins. Let's move to and see how this builds into an even more extreme variation of the theory. This is the artificial moon hypothesis. It's a highly speculative claim suggesting that our moon isn't a natural satellite at all. Instead, some believe it's a gigantic, constructed object deliberately positioned in orbit by an unknown civilization. It takes the mystery of the hollow spaces and adds this architectural, alien intent to it, a watchtower in the sky, so to speak. Now, why do people believe this? Well, to be fair, the moon does have some genuinely unusual characteristics. Its striking size relative to Earth, an orbit that creates perfectly spectacular solar eclipses. It definitely leaves us with questions. But we have to ground ourselves in scientific reality here. Unusual does not automatically mean artificial. As of right now, there is absolutely zero reliable evidence that the moon was built by anyone or anything. They are fascinating theories for sure, but they are not established discoveries. Part 5, the lunar interior. So if it's not a hollow alien spacecraft, what is actually going on? Well, the answer lies in the stark differences between our two worlds, and this brilliantly illustrates why the moon behaves the way it does. Our planet is a living, breathing, water-filled sphere. Earth's interior is relatively damp. Water and other materials absorb seismic waves very quickly, deadening the vibrations almost immediately. The lunar interior, on the other hand, is incredibly dry. Because it has no atmosphere and is so rigid throughout its layers, seismic waves can travel through the lunar material in ways that allow them to persist for a surprisingly long time. Think of the sequence of events.
When you strike the moon, say with a meteorite or a heavy spacecraft module, those seismic waves travel rapidly through that dry rock. They reflect off different internal boundaries, and they persist, just bouncing around. By listening to how those waves slow down, reflect, and continue, much like listening to the sound of a struck bell to figure out what it's made of, scientists are able to meticulously map the hidden solid layers beneath the surface.
So, the crucial point is this major misunderstanding. The word ringing was only ever meant to describe the behavior of the seismic waves bouncing around in a remarkably dry environment. It did not mean the moon was a literal physical metal bell or an empty shell. The scientific metaphor was taken completely out of context, and a wild theory grew far beyond what the original, very real evidence actually demonstrated.
But even though the scientific data tells us the moon isn't a hollow shell, that doesn't mean we know everything. Modern missions are up there right now, continuing to study lunar geology. The moon is still orbiting Earth, and it's still hiding incredibly real mysteries waiting to be explored. Because of that, File 021 remains open.
Subscribe to the Enigma Files, where every mystery has a file and every file hides a story. Until the next investigation, stay curious.